All right, greetings everyone. I want to greet you with lots of love, peace, and positivity. I hope you're doing well. I want to talk about the racism hustle in this video. It's a touchy topic, but it's been something that it's been on my mind for quite some time now. And more recently, I've seen developments online, in particular on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, where what I call the racism hustle has got it's gone too far. It's out of control, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. So bear with me on this sensitive topic. I am someone who recognizes that racism does in fact exist, and that there are people who have negative views about other groups of people. And part of those views happen to be this notion that other groups of people as a whole are somehow inferior on some level to other groups of people. Uh, when I say on some levels, this could be mentally inferior, physically inferior. Um, I mean, it goes emotional inferior, and then all that like leads into all areas of life, economics, politics, religion. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I recognize that racism is an issue, and that there are people who have these antiquated thoughts and ideas when it comes to this concept of race, and also recognize that the concept of race is not scientific. It's a social construct in the first place. It's not scientific, but that just because it is a social construct that is not scientific does not mean that it does not have an impact, on people's life, and doesn't have an impact on how people think and how they behave and how they treat other people, or how they allow themselves to be treated by other people. So in the first place, I recognize that racism is an issue. And though, in particular here in the United States of America, though it has been a long-standing issue, I also recognize that it is not as significant of an issue as it has been. Let's say we can go back 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, or 200 years ago, etc. But it is an issue, and it is a problem. What I want to really focus on in this video with the remainder of the time that I have here is how racism has been turned into an online hustle. In other words, that there are people who use racism as a means, simply as a means, to generate income. It's a hustle. In other words, it's not talked about in a way to where, you can kind of have people figure out, okay, what needs to take place in order for us to resolve this issue of racism? What needs to change in society? What needs to change in people? What needs to change in people's mentality about other groups of people? What needs to change in terms of how we classify the human species along this concept, the social construct of race? So in other words, to bring up the concept of race and to deal with the issue of racism, which is real, it's not intended to solve the issue, but rather to perpetuate the issue as a income stream. In other words, to simply bring it up and to bring it up over and over again without any real solutions, it can be profitable. And the reason why is because there are a lot of people who they have given so much power to this issue of racism that anyone who talks about it, simply talking about it, is something worth supporting. Not necessarily supporting those who are attempting to resolve the issue of racism. You guys understand the difference between the two? It's one thing to talk and to talk about problems, another thing to talk and then talk about how to solve the problems, and then the next level is to actually solve the problems. But it's very profitable simply to talk about the problem, or to talk about problems, but to talk about the problem of racism, it's profitable because you can always pull people in. People, they get so, it's an emotional topic because racism is real. It's unfair, it's unjust. So it's a very emotionally charged topic. And if you can just bring up the topic over and over again and give examples of people being racist and you talk about it, that compels people to kind of be present because they want to hear, because it validates what perhaps they've experienced to different degrees. It could be to a lesser degree, to a greater degree, but the fact that someone is talking about it is enough. But the real issue is that to talk about it without any solution, and then to taking it to the next level and actually figuring out ways to solve it, and then solving the issue or solving the problem or correcting the problem, that's not even part of it. It's about stringing people along indefinitely. And that's what I mean by it's gone too far, and it's out of control. And I've seen it online for a long time, but more recently, I think it's really gone to the point where it's so far out of control. Let me give you two examples of what I mean. And I'm going to do a separate video to talk about the murder of Nipsey Hussle. And it's interesting because most people don't phrase it that way, but that's really what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the murder of a person. And one of the reasons why people don't want to phrase it as the murder of Nipsey Hussle is because there are a lot of people who don't want to deal with the murder of Nipsey Hussle. And what we're really talking about is that one of the permanent issues facing African American folk or Black folk today, and that is the issue of Black on Black crime, what has been called Black on Black crime. So it's easier to deal with Nipsey Hussle if we kind of phrase it as a memorial service, and we're going to, he was a great man and all these types of things. It's easier to deal with the death or the murder compared to if we said, wait a minute, the real issue here and the deeper issue here is how Black folk, African American folk, how we are murdering each other for ridiculous reasons. That's a much more difficult topic to deal with. You guys see my point? So even how people are phrasing the conversation, I think it's indicative of the sense that it's such a real and raw and heart-wrenching issue and topic that it's easier to talk about it within the scope of Nipsey Hussle as an entrepreneur, as a successful rap artist, as someone who's giving back to the community, as a father. It's easier to talk about it within that frame of reference compared to dealing with the other issue, which is a preeminent issue in the African American community, and that is the Black on Black crime and how we are murdering each other at alarming rates. So this has come up in the news, and it's been so. And there was a big memorial service, and there are a lot of people who attended. Stevie Wonder sang at the memorial service, and Louis Farrakhan gave a speech, and there's other people. Snoop Dogg talked, and I mean it was huge. It was at the Staples Center in Los Angeles. But what I've noticed is that once this issue really started to pick up, or this particular event, the murder of Nipsey Hussle, started to pick up steam, there are a lot of people, especially on YouTube, who were kind of spinning the murder of Nipsey Hussle within the scope of racism. See, this is what I mean. It's all, it's racism. In other words, this is white people. These are white people who murdered him. This is some type of conspiracy against him because he was trying to get back to the Black community. It's the record execs. It's that these are all white people, and it's a racism issue. No evidence to prove this whatsoever. And this was like early on, before information came out. And I saw a lot of people doing that. The conspiracy theories, and a lot of it was this idea of racism, the idea of global white supremacy, the idea of white people. These are the people who had this man murdered. No evidence to prove this. Is what I'm saying. It's just gone. It's gotten out of control. It's gone too far. Racism is an issue, and it is unjust. But people are using it simply to get views. They're using it simply to be able to generate income. They're using it to sell products. I mean, it's gotten out of control. To sell services to people. It's gotten so far out of control. And I saw so many people online, and it's unfortunate because you disrespect the memory of someone. You disrespect the life of someone. As when you frame it in this context of racism, and racism had nothing to do with it. What really had something to do with it was Black on Black crime. No one's really talking about that. So it's easier to say, okay, no, this is white people who killed Nipsey Hussle. But then we find out later, and not too much later, that no, it was a Black person who killed Nipsey Hussle. It was someone that he knew, and he's known for a long time. So before they were talking about how it was racism, and then now and it was white people. But then when the truth comes out, now I've seen people, they've spin it. They say, oh, no, well, look, you got to understand that the Black person who killed Nipsey Hussle, the reason why he did this was because of white people. I mean, it's just gone too far. It's so far out of control, and it dishonors Nipsey Hussle's life. And I've never followed Nipsey Hussle. I never listened to his music or anything. I didn't even have any idea. So I don't have like an emotional connection outside of the fact that I recognize that this particular issue hits close to home for so many of us because we've experienced these types of things over and over again throughout our lives. I'm 42 years old now. This is nothing new. This has happened so many times throughout my life, where a Black man kills another Black man, a Black boy kills another Black boy. Black on Black crime. I've seen it so many times. It's almost to the point where I wasn't even surprised. I was like, oh well, it's unfortunate, but it's not like we don't expect these things to take place. I mean, it's sad too. Like even for me to even have to have that type of mentality where I wasn't really moved by it per se, because I've seen it so many times in the past. And because I didn't have any connection to Nipsey Hussle, I didn't listen to his music, and there was no kind of emotional connection to him. It was like, okay, here's another example of something that's been going on. It's one of the preeminent issue, in my opinion, more significant than racism. is the issue of how we treat each other as Black people. But we don't tend to talk about that. I think that it's a much more complex and difficult conversation to have, because now it's about personal accountability compared to blaming everything on white people, including the murder of Nipsey Hussle. White people didn't have anything to do with that. But so many people use that idea of racism and what they call global white supremacy as an opportunity to kind of push their agenda. And a lot of their agenda is this idea of global white supremacy as this megalithic superstructure that we have no power or control over, and how it's oppressing us so greatly, so significantly that we can't even achieve. And yet what we find out the truth is that global white supremacy or racism had nothing to do with it. In terms of Nipsey Russell, what it had to do with is how we treat each other as Black folk, and the fact that we murder each other at alarming rates. So that's one example. It's just gone so far and it's so out of control, and it's utterly ridiculous at this point. But there's another example I want to point out, and this deals with Umar Johnson, because he did videos to talk about Nipsey Hussle too, to use it as an opportunity to kind of promote himself too. It was so ridiculous. But more recently, and the same thing in Los Angeles, Magic Johnson, well-known Hall of Fame basketball player, one of the greatest basketball players of all time. He had a role in, I think it was the president. I think it was a president. I can look it up. Let me just to be clear here, of the Los Angeles Lakers. And recently he stepped down. So let me look this up. So Magic Johnson. Yeah, and he's larger than life too. That's the other thing about he's larger than life. That's the one thing about Magic Johnson. So Magic Johnson steps down as the Lakers president of basketball operations. Now this happened like maybe 2 or 3 days ago. Excuse me. And based upon the topic that we're addressing here, and we're talking about racism, how people are using it, and it's just gone too far to use it as an excuse for everything. It's like you blame everything on racism. I think it's just gone too far. Racism is a problem, and we need to acknowledge that, but we also need to be clear about when it is an issue and when it's not an issue. And so what happened was Umar Johnson, when he heard about Magic Johnson stepping down, again, he stepped down. He didn't retire, or he wasn't fired. He stepped down on his own volition. In other words, he had control. He can either step down, he could stay, or he could step down. He decided to step down. That was his choice. No one telling him that he could do anything otherwise. It was his choice. It wasn't racism's fault. Okay, he stepped down himself. That's what something he decided to, based upon his own power as president, and he stepped down. People do that all the time. But based on what we've been talking about, how does someone like Umar Johnson spin this? He's talking about how no, this is about racism. And how white people, in the end, they may think of you as family, or they may say that you're family, that you're part of the quote unquote family team or the family dynamic. But in the end, if it serves them, because of racism, they will just get rid of you. They will ultimately fire you if you're at a job or whatever the case may be. But he wasn't fired in the first place. And then Umar Johnson went on to say that there's 2 other people involved in this. Well, there's 3. There's the owner. Her last name is Buss, Jenny Buss, I think. Yeah, I think it's Jenny Buss, who's really close with Magic Johnson. But then there's also the coach of the Lakers, and his name is Bill Walton. Yeah, Bill Walton. And then there is another guy. I can't remember his name right now. He's under Magic Johnson, but he has a very prominent role. But anyway, Umar Johnson went on to state that Jeannie Buss, and how she chose, basically was saying that she chose Luke Walton and this other guy, this is a white guy, over Magic Johnson. That's why Magic Johnson, he was ultimately fired, But no, Magic Johnson stepped down. And the idea was that the issue here is racism, and how white people, in the end, they will work together, and they will work against Black people. They will work against the Black man. They will work against Magic Johnson. And the other guy's name is Rob Pelinka, by the way, just came to mind. Okay. So you have Rob Pelinka, you have Bill Walton, and you have Jeannie Buss. And the idea, and this is how Umar Johnson was trying to frame it, it was those 3 against Magic Johnson. It was those 3 white people against Magic Johnson, who's a Black man. And that the reason why he's out, as the president, is because these 3 white people are against him. This is just goes so, it just saw, but again, Umar Johnson, he stepped down. He decided to resign ultimately. That was his choice. But what's interesting is, the following day, Luke Walton was fired. Well, in essence, the way that they phrased it was mutual. It was a mutual agreement. But he's out of there in essence. Some people were saying he was fired. Well, they were saying things about Magic Johnson. But the point is that if Umar Johnson was trying to promote this whole issue, this idea of racism as the issue, and Luke Walton is white, and he's part of this trilogy of white people, Rob Pelinka, Jeannie Buss, and Luke Walton, and they're against Magic Johnson. Well, then why is it that after Magic Johnson leaves, Luke Walton leaves? It just the whole idea of racism as an issue just implodes upon itself. It shows that it wasn't the issue at all. It wasn't the issue in the first place. But this is what I mean, like just taking this, which is a problem, taking race and just trying to kind of throw a wide net and try to make everything about race for views, to turn it ultimately into a revenue stream. It's just gotten so far out of control. And it also, what it does is it minimizes the issue of racism, because it's almost as if it jeopardizes people's sense that it is a serious problem, when it is in fact a serious problem. See, in other words, that if you use these examples where it's not even the issue, then it kind of minimizes the significance of the issue. Because ultimately people are going to figure out, okay, wait a minute, that had nothing to do with racism. Well, then why was this person saying it was all about racism? Well, if it had nothing to do with racism, maybe racism isn't that big of an issue anyway. So what I'm saying is, no, racism is an issue, but what happens is, especially online, is that there are people who use it and they try to make it the only issue, and they blow it out of proportion, and then they assign racism to issues that have nothing to do with racism. And they do it to generate, views and likes and clicks, and then ultimately to convert that into income. And it's just gone so far out of control. I've talked about the concept of race. I've also talked about racism in the past, but I recognize that it is not as significant of an issue as many people online try to make it out to be. It is a problem. It is a serious problem. But when it comes to Black people, the most important issue that needs to be addressed is how we treat each other in the first place. That's the most significant issue. And we can't blame how we treat each other on racism, because how we treat each other, it's a choice. It's how we interact with, and there's nothing stopping us from treating each other with common human decency and respect, where we see our human value and human worth, so that we don't denigrate each other, disrespect each other, or murder each other arbitrarily, indiscriminately. This whole race hustle has gotten so far out of control, and it doesn't solve anything. And in particular, it doesn't solve how we as a community are treating each other. And that is the most important issue that needs to be addressed, in my opinion. All right. Well, that's about it, ladies and gentlemen. I want to send y'all lots of love, peace, and positivity. I'll talk with y'all soon. Take care. Peace.